Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud, all stoned. In this video, we're going to do part 2 of Little Blue Book number 1402, and it's titled How I Went to the Devil, written by Clay Fulks. And this one must have been written, well, it had to be written after 1928 because there's quotes in here, and it's a quote from 1928. So this was probably written in maybe the early 30s. All right, so here we go. Yeah, my brain just went. Boop. As a matter of course, I was expected at once to join the church, the missionary Baptist and the only one in the neighborhood. But for months I hung back. I had no preference for any other denomination, but I had no inclination whatever to participate in any formalized ritualistic religious ceremonies, much less to become the subject of such rites. I must have been a natural-born, irredeemable pagan of some sort. I liked at times to escape from the noisy and distracting vanities and littleness of the life about me, and to wander, solitary and alone, into mountain solitudes where, undisturbed, I could contemplate the vastness and mysteriousness of the universe, meditate on the undiscoverable meaning and purpose of life, wonder whence I had come, why I was here, and whither I was bound, and yearn to establish some psychic communication and communion with the Great Spirit, the great designer, author, and finisher of matter and life, of space and time. In these, my sacred retreats, I sought imploringly to find out God, but I had no wish to join in any perfunctory, prearranged, supervised religious services with a motley crowd of worshippers. I could see nothing more than stale and puerile custom in a congregation's formally agreed to meet in a certain holy house at 11 o'clock on a certain day a month, hence to appropriate God, His Son, and the Holy Ghost, and adding, as an afterthought, say, tell everybody to come. I could not, in the midst of the crowd, keep with perfect sweetness the solemnity and independence of solitude, could not attain any genuinely worshipful mood. On the contrary, I became hostile, critical, perplexed, and amused. I didn't love the brethren very much. Moreover, vague doubts from many sources, doubts dealing with the fundamental assumptions of Christianity, began finding lodgment in my mind. One main source of these doubts lay in the monstrous stories and incredible miracles of the Hebrew Scriptures themselves, which I tried valiantly, but in vain, to reconcile with reason and known facts of the world about me. Another source lay in the evident difference of attitude toward the periodic religious powwows of the community manifested by the individuals I knew. I could not overlook the fact that when the revivals opened, those persons whose intelligence I respected most became shy, reticent, embarrassing, whereas those of little or no trace of intelligence assumed leadership, shouting and cavorting like lunatics. Was there not some significance in this phenomenon? And if so, which way did it point? Dimly, I could foresee that, in my mind, the final settlement of the whole religious issue lay in the future. Several prayerful efforts were made to head me into the fold, but I eluded all the roundups. Then, a practical worldly consideration, probably inspired by Satan, took shape in my mind, rapidly developing into deliberate intention. My prospective father-in-law, the right-hand pillar of the local church, had been heartless enough to throw obstructions in the way of my wooing. The young lady's mother also had aided and abetted him in his obstructive stratagems. Therefore, I soon found myself more interested in propitiating the old folks than in humoring the Holy Ghost. You see the point, brethren. Well, I faced the ordeal as manfully as possible and suffered myself. One sultry summer day to be led to the tune of "This is my beloved son" into a stagnant pool which any self-respecting alligator would have hesitated to enter. In this act of immersion, I mentally acknowledged at that moment that I was playing the part of a dumb fool. But the end seemed to justify the means, and anyway, the thing was soon over with. The sacrifice turned out to be wholly acceptable. A little later, I was easily intrigued into joining the young people's prayer meeting because it gave me the opportunity to walk in the moonlight through an enchanted lane half a mile long with the incomparable young woman whose captive I was. But even when the moon didn't shine, the walks seemed no less enrapturing, so coolingly intimate they could be in the friendly dark. As one exception to the general rule, these divine services afforded me much genuine ecstasy, despite my suspicion that the prayers I addressed to the throne of grace ascended no higher than the ceiling of our Joss house. These meetings, we were successful. We boys, even though we didn't love the elder brethren very much, had a good time. Indeed, we could honestly testify to glimpsing visions beatific. But this praying business soon paled on us. It was, in fact, the only disagreeable feature of these meetings. We soon invented a better method of worship, the YPPM of Palestine. So far as we were concerned, passed into unregretted destitute. Palestine Church during this period was pastored by a big, illiterate epileptic who somehow held on and on over opposition of the younger members of his flock, and whenever his fits had become a bore to us, we carried our worshipings to the scenic spot of the neighboring wildwoods. I remained a church member for only about 3 years. However, before Satan had succeeded in separating me from the fold of the faithful, I had an experience which, had it been repeated a few times, would certainly have rendered me a fit subject for the madhouse. At Sunday school one morning, I noted the presence of a stranger of very striking appearance. Whispered inquiries went the rounds among us youngsters, but none of us knew who he was. Finally, we learned he was Clubfoot Smith, a backwoods Bosset whose fame had preceded him. It was announced that he was presently to preach for us, and we picked up our ears in anticipation of a powerful sermon. We were not disappointed. In fact, the holy discourse proved entirely too powerful for me. Physically, Clubfoot Smith was a cyclopean proportions, standing close to 7 feet. When he arose in the pulpit, his head almost reached to the scuttle hole. Bony and sinewy as he was, he must have weighed, well, nigh 300 pounds. Indeed, he seemed a human behemoth from the valley of Hespedon, where the lion roareth and the whangdoodle mourneth for the firstborn. His mighty gray beard fell to his waistband, and when he opened his mouth, the very walls of the church house resounded like a big bass drum, and the clappers rattled on the roof. The subject of his sermon was the awful, unpardonable sin, the sin against the Holy Ghost. And with a suddenness that was quite upsetting, I seemed to become the object of his terrible anthemia. He fixed his great eyes squarely on me, and presently, like a worm in the hot ashes, I began to squirm and twist in my pew. With might and main, I strove to rally my panic-stricken thoughts. I tried to think which one of the 7 deadly sins, pride, covetousness, envy, lust, wrath, gluttony, sloth, I had been so weak and so foolish as to commit. Pride? Well, Involuntary comparisons of myself with several unwashed zanies I knew had produced that sin in me. Guilty. Covetousness? Thank the Lord I had little of that. But was not such thankfulness parasitical and therefore sinful? Envy? Had I not envied Adam himself? Good God! Lust? My heart stood still. Had not the bewitching beauty of a certain young females of the species generated that sin in me? In spite of myself, I pleaded desperately, but guilty. Oh my God, guilty. I could enumerate no further, but with one swift, sickening, comprehensive review of my past days, I was forced to acknowledge my guiltiness of wrath, gluttony, and sloth in one overwhelming lump sum. From vaguely wondering which one of the seven deadlies I had committed, I passed quickly to the devastating discovery that I had committed all of them. Meanwhile, Clubfoot roared right on. I could hear, as in a dream, his great voice booming out of the blood-curdling declaration that the vile wretch who had committed the sin against the Holy Ghost should never dare even to pray for mercy. His very prayers were become the most hateful abomination to the Lord. I could hear the torture no longer. Why I didn't fall to the floor, senseless and frothing at the mouth, or leap up, shrieking the shrill shrieks of the damned, I do not know. I know only that I was able to get to my feet and stagger out of the house. My exit was not unobserved. As I hurried down the trail that led into the adjacent forest, I heard footsteps coming behind me. Glancing backward over my quaking shoulder, I saw following me my friend, Baptist John. In the eyes of half the congregation, I almost ran into the sheltering woods. Once out of sight from the church house, I slowed down my pace, letting Baptist John overtake me. Immediately, of course, he wanted to know what was the matter with me. I told him in as casual a manner as possible that lately I had been troubled with something like vertigo, lumbago, sleeping sickness, glanders, and cholera morbus, attended by nausea and bearing down pains. That, in short, I wasn't very well anyway. Something, it must have been Satan, whispered to me to lie out of it, and if I could, I was damned anyway. And with dogged resolution, I kept the secret of my damnation to myself. For once, Baptist John was too considerate to press an inquiry any further, and in an incredibly short time, my mental resiliency reasserted itself. Once out of the noxious atmosphere of the theological bohum upus, the fresh air and bright sunshine restored my overwrought nerves, and I breathed easier. It is scarcely necessary to add that I never heard Clubfoot Smith again, nor did I ever hear another like him. Gradually, doubtfully, I recovered from the dire effects of his theological thunderbolt, but it was several years before I altogether was free from the haunting fear of all religious threats and anathemas. It was still longer before my abhorrence for brimstone peddlers was transmuted into anything like a merry tee-hee. And even yet, if I could believe there is a hell, I suspect I should cherish the hope that old Clubfoot Smith now lies naked and howling at the bottom of the hottest and nethermost cavern. But finally, Satan had compassion on my troubled soul. Soon after my expulsion from the Baptist Church, on a charge of non-attendance or something, the ancient question of the final perseverance of the saints resolved itself, in my mind, into the question of whether the aforesaid saints could think or not. Those who could think, I concluded, even in the most elementary fashion, stood in imminent peril of falling from grace, whereas those who could not think at all had their feet solidly planted on the rock of ages and might sleep secure in the everlasting arms. All my subsequent and rather exhaustive researches had confirmed me in that conclusion. Even before I was out of my troublous 20s, I achieved a peace of mind on the whole subject of religion which no fundamentalist can possibly understand. Luckily for me, I developed a taste for reading and soon made the significant discovery that, in general, those writers who had given the world the most worthwhile pieces of literature were, obviously, quite unorthodox. While those who had been able to produce only the most indifferent sort of stuff, or more frequently, only the most jejune nonsense, clung childlike to the primitive antediluvian faith. This clue I followed eagerly, contrasting the majestic and powerful pages of Gibbon and Buckle with the sentimental prattle such as Harold Bell Wright, weighing the arguments of the Age of Reason against vapid sermons of Talmage, setting the philosophy of Emerson against the fantastic theory of the grass-fed Edwardises of the native health, until the suspicion grew apace in my mind that one God was as mythical as another, and that Christ was simply the good Saint Nicholas of the grown-up children who eagerly accept to find salvation in their socks. Inevitably, Satan and some of his lesser lieutenants, in the persons of friends of mine, inveigled me into reading scientific literature. I had barely got started in this wicked course when Jehovah turned his offended back on me, and has not recognized me since. Wherefore, for many years now, I have consistently followed Satan, and, I suppose, I shall follow him to the end of my days. And that's the end of that chapter. Now, the new chapter, or the second chapter, I guess, there's only 2 chapters in this book. Let's see, how many pages? 23? Yeah, we got enough. Is Satan, strategist extraordinaire. And this has a lot of quotes in it. There are many who think the devil is a horrible monster in appearance, with a tail and cloven feet and horns. But the very opposite is the truth. The devil is represented in the Bible as being wonderfully beautiful and attractive. See Ezekiel 28:12. In another place, the devil is represented as being clothed as an angel of light, and in that guise he can deceive all except the very elect. The methods of the devil are deceptive. He works in business, he works in politics, he works in religion. The devil is a very religious being, and he controls most of the religions of the world, and just because an institution is called a church is no reason to believe that it is necessarily a good thing, because the devil has counterfeited the true religion, and it is a sad fact that a majority of the people are satisfied with the counterfeit. The Bible is the only safe guide, and each of us should decide, using the Bible as the guide, what is true and what is counterfeit in religion for each of us must appear for himself before the judgment seat of Christ. And those who allow the devil to deceive them shall suffer the ruin that shall finally come to the devil, because the devil shall in the end be cast into the pit he had used for others. And that is an extract from a sermon delivered by the Reverend Ben M. Bogard, pastor of the Antioch Missionary Baptist Church, Little Rock, Arkansas, Sunday, June 24th, 1928, as reported by the Arkansas Gazette on the following day. This inspired revelation stimulated me to do a little research myself, and though I would not dare defy Jehovah by disputing anything which one of his accredited representatives has uttered, I find that, upon the most trustworthy authority, Satan does not invariably appear as a handsome Apollo. Perhaps it is only when he goes out as lady killer that he assumes such a captivating role. It is well known among fundamentalist clergymen that Satan is an adept at manhandling young ladies, of alluring charms and pleasing pulchritudes, particularly when he can catch them scantily attired. Wherefore it is that he lies in wait at dance halls and bathing beaches, and probably it was in this seductive sport that he came under the frowning observation of Brother Ben. Indeed, the Reverend Ben himself admits this metaphoric character of Satan when he says in this guise he can deceive all except the very elect. Yeah, the very elect doubtless refers to fundamentalists of the missionary Baptist persuasion. But I was surprised on looking up the citation to Ezekiel 28:12 to note that Zeke misses the point entirely. His testimony, therefore, is altogether incompetent, irreverent, irrelevant, and immaterial. Zeke was testifying concerning a certain prince of Tyrus, against whom he and Jehovah were nursing a cantankerous grudge. Zeke disposes and says, Son of man, take up a lamentation against the king of Tyrus, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord God, Thou sealest up the sum full of wisdom, and perfect in beauty. It will be noted that Zeke waxes very sarcastic here, but he is certainly making not the remotest reference to Satan. I am not alleging that Brother Ben erred. It was Zeke himself, as anyone can see, who shot so wide of the mark. But to set down some of the more important results of my own research. First, however, I wish to state most empathetically and unequivocally that my findings in no wise contravene or even raise the slightest doubt concerning the variable personal appearances, habits, and peculiarities of Satan, nor the subtle and manifold methods by which he practices his profession, as those facts are evidently understood and taught by Brother Ben. My findings conclusively confirm his own and are offered here simply as additional proof. Now, it may be objected by persons deeply versed in theology and diabolical lore that some confirmation and proof are quite superfluous and unnecessary. But it should be sufficient to remind them that in this modern age of science, falsely so called, there is coming into prominence a rising generation so perverse, so wicked, and so stiff-necked as to question the authority and even to affect doubt the diabolic nature of Satan. Some have been so perverted by higher education, so-called, as to claim that Satan is mere mythical being or a personification of evil, instead of the flesh and blood, hair and hide, infernal deity that he is. Indeed, the propagation of this opinion, so generally held by the literate youth of the world, is perhaps the latest masterstroke of that supreme strategist, Satan himself, as I shall endeavor to prove in the course of this article. It is to the rising generators of America, therefore, that I specially wish to submit the results of my investigation. In order to have the proper historical perspective, I have chosen the 17th century as the period for review, and as a guarantee of authenticity, I have selected the sacred chroniclers of Scotland as my authorities. But this choice of time and place is somewhat arbitrary and was made mostly for convenience. It is not intended to be implied that the solemn facts to be hereinafter narrated are peculiar either to Scotland or to the 17th century, for even today, in some of the most heavily shaded portions of Africa, in the Fiji Islands, in some of our southern states, and possibly in a few other remote places, the same cunning and audacious activities of Satan are frequently observed and reported by competent sacred witnesses. It is well known, of course, that up till the coming of the new learning and later, the Christian world was densely inhabited by evil spirits who roamed up and down the earth or flitted at will through the nocturnal air. Their number was as the sands of the seashore, and few, indeed, were the persons or places exempt from their dread visitations. At their head stood Satan, their proud and indefatigable chieftain, who delighted in appearing in person to ensure or terrify everyone he met. Ensnare or terrify. For time out of mind and throughout Christendom, Satan and his cohorts had inflicted incalculable sufferings on both the just and the unjust. Their whole mission was the precipitation of malice, mischiefs, and immedicable woes, and they spared neither sex, age, nor condition. So here are some quotes from the 17th century from Scottish authorities. If it be asked, if there be such a thing as the haunting of evil spirits, we answer that there are evil spirits ranging up and down through the earth is certain, even though hell be their prison properly. Yet have they a sort of dominion and abode both in the earth and air. Partly as a piece of their curse, this is laid on them to wander, partly as their exercise to tempt men or bring spiritual or temporal hurt to them. Durham's Commentary upon the Book of the Revelation, page 582. We should remember that we sojourn in a world where devils are and do haunt among us. Hutchinson's Exposition of the Book of Job, page 9. But the truth itself is sure that such a party is at this day encompassing the earth and trafficking up and down there, to prove which by arguments were to light a candle to let men see that it is day, while it is known what ordinary familiar converse may have therewith. That does make a whole lot of sense. But it's from Fleming's Fulfilling of the Scriptures, page 217. There is not one whom he assaileth not. Abernathy's Psyche for the Soul, page 101. As Brother Bogard has shrewdly observed, Satan adopts disguises cunningly calculated to deceive and confound even the wary. Everyone, in fact, except the very elect. He may appear as a black hound, the ornery cuss, as a bird, or as a Holstein bull. This night, James Lockhead told me, that last year, if I mistake not, at the communion of Baffron, he was much helped all day. At night, when dark somewhat, he went out to fields to pray, and a terrible slavish fear came on him that he almost lost his senses. However, he resolved to go on to his duty. By the time he was at the place, his fear was off him, and lying on the nose side, a black dog came to his head and stood. He said he knew it to be Satan, and shook his hand, but found nothing, it evanishing. Lord help against his devices and strengthen against them. Woodrow Alencanta, Volume 1, page 24. What a pity that James Lockhead could not have lived to meet Brother Ben and exchange holy reminiscences with him. What a beautiful fellowship would have sprung up between them. The devil appeared like a little whelp, like a brown whelp. Registers of the Prophecy by Lamarck, page 77. The celebrated Pendon was present when there came down the appearance of a raven and sat upon one man's head. Thereupon, going home, Mr. Pendon said to his landlord, I always thought there was devilry among you, but I never thought that he did appear visibly among you. Till now I have seen it. Oh, for the Lord's sake, quit this way. Walker's Bibliographa, Presbyteria, Volume 1, pages 112, or 111 and 112. I heard a voice just before me on the other side of the hedge, and it seemed to be like the groaning of an aged man. It continued so some time. I knew no man could be there, for on the other side of the hedge where I heard the groaning, there was a great stank or pull. I nothing doubted but it was Satan, and I guessed his design. Stevenson's Rare Soul-Strengthening Cordial for Old and Young Christians, page 29. Satan appeared sometimes as a white man in black clothes, and sometimes as a black man in black clothes. Sinclair's Satan's Invisible World Discovered gives us, at page 8, a glimpse of the style the old sport affected in 1684. That season, he wore black clothes and a blue band and white handcuffs. At this time, however, he seems to have been rather loutish as a beau brummel. He observed one of the black man's feet to be cloven, and that the black man's apparel was black, and that he had a blue band about his neck, and white handcuffs, and that he had hoggers upon his legs without shoes, and that the black man's voice was hollow and ghastly. Satan's Invisible World Discovered, page 9. His stratagem seems to have been innumerable and of infinite variety, even then, though we may be sure, from the solemn testimony of the fundamentalist theologians, that in both the style of his apparel and in professional technique, he is in keeping abreast of the times. The acquired knowledge of the devil is great, he being an advancing student and still learning now above 5,000 years. Rutherford's Christ dying and drawing sinners to himself, page 204. He knows very well, partly by the quickness of his nature and partly by long experience, being now very near 6,000 years old. Cowper's Heaven Opened, page 219. And Abernathy's Psyche for the Soul, page 142. Binning's Sermon, volume 1, page 67, 110. Ferguson's Exposition of the Epistles of Paul, page 475, and Fleming's Fulfilling of the Scriptures, page 45, all testify to the great sleight and cunning diligence, skill, excellent substance, great natural parts, long experience, and deep understanding of Satan. In Professor Sinclair's invaluable and evidently inspired work, Satan's Invisible World Discovered, page 141, we find in 1684 an evident instance that the devil can transport the bodies of men and women through the air. It is true, he did not carry her far off, but not for want of skill and power. Doubtless the gal was soon ready to compromise with him. Usually it appeared that he togged himself out in the garb of layman, but alas, he had the audacity of, on many occasions, just as Brother Bogart suggests, to attire himself as a minister of the gospel. In this guise, undoubtedly, he plays the devil in his most humorous and characteristic manner. In Woodrow's Analectia, volume 1, page 103 and 104, we have a well-authenticated account of Satan's deceiving one young preacher in this way. But the Reverend Robert Blair, whose holy astuteness seems to be reincarnated in Brother Ben, detected the trick and, with an awful seriousness appearing in his countenance, began to tell the youth his hazard, and that the man whom he took for a minister was the devil, who had trepanned him and brought him into his net, advised him to the earnest with God in prayer, and likewise not to give way to despair, for there was yet hope. The preacher had been so far duped as to give the devil a written promise to do whatever he had requested. As soon as the Reverend Blair ascertained this fact, he took the young divine before the presbytery and narrated the circumstances to the members thereof. They were all strangely affected with it, and resolved unanimously to dispatch the presbytery business presently, and to stay all night in town, and on the morrow to meet for prayer in one of the most retired churches of the presbytery, acquainting none with their business, but taking their youth alongst with them, whom they keeped all wise close by them, which was done. And after the ministers had prayed, all of them round, except Mr. Blair, who prayed last. In time of his prayer there came a violent rushing of wind upon the church, so great that they thought the church should have fallen down upon their ears. And with that, the youth's paper and covenant, i.e. the covenant which he had signed at the request of Satan, drops down from the roof of the church among the ministers. Buckle says that he, Satan, frequently appeared to the clergy and tried to coax them over to his side. In that, of course, he failed. But out of the ministry, few indeed could withstand him. He could raise storms and tempests. He could work not only on the mind, but also on the organs of the body, making men hear and see whatever he chose. Of this, victims, some he prompted to commit suicide, others to commit murder. Still formidable as he was, no Christian was considered to have attained to a full religious experience unless he had literally seen him, talked to him, and fought with him. Some atheistic smart aleck may want to claim that Buckle wrote this with his tongue in his cheek, but it is quite evident that he was soberly recording well-known facts. But, according to the unimpeachable testimony of Brother Bogard, Satan has so far overcome his earlier inability to form an alliance with the clergy as to control most of the religions of the world. And, Brother Ben continues, just because an institution is called a church is no reason to believe that it is necessarily a good thing, because the devil has counterfeited the true religion, and it is a sad fact that a majority of the people are satisfied with the counterfeit. This astounding revelation will doubtless strike terror to millions of hearts in the South. Still, the very elect must have been privy to this awful state of affairs all along. It is practically as certain now that Satan is in control of all the churches except the Missionary Baptist, the Pentecostal, the Nazarene, and possibly a few others. That he has just dictated the nomination of Al Smith at Houston is self-evident. And we might expect to see a real test of Satan's strength as a political boss in these states in the forthcoming election, except for the very strong probability that he has already gone in cahoots with Hoover, too. That would be just like the devil. Verily, as he grows older, he grows wickeder and wiser, and Lordy mercy, there is no telling through the mouths of what great preachers Satan is now playing the devil with thousands of precious and immortal souls. Naturally, he would select some great fundamentalist clergyman like, say, the Reverend Billy Sunday or St. John Roach Stratton. The trick of speaking through the mouths of modernist clergymen like, say, John Haynes, Holmes, or Norman Thomas would be a little too obvious for so consummate a strategist as Satan. What if, indeed, he is plying his craft through Ben M. Bogard himself? I ardently hope it isn't true, for if it is, many a poor, illiterate, unsophisticated Arkansawer, on the morning of the resurrection, if no sooner, will find himself in a hell of a pickle. That's the end of Little Blue Book number 1402, titled How I Went to the Devil, written by Clay Fulks. Thanks for listening, and join me in the next Little Blue Book.